Yeah. See? And now it's going up just like I advertised. I told you it would. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sustainiacs. I'm Mike Vincent. I am always the Sustainiac. This week, the other one is Chris Draper. And I can honestly say, I'm not sure that he isn't Robert Herjavec. He looks like him, and I have my suspicions. But I'm going to go with he's actually the CEO of ESG Rack, and it is Chris Draper. At the end of the show, you guys tell me what you think. Is he actually someone else in disguise? But Chris, thanks for
Well,
coming on the show, my brother.
no, thank you very much, man. I have to say, I also get Treat Williams until his passing, and Jason Bateman. So there's obviously markets for everyone. So we'll see. That's my social media handle is the other Draper, just to cover all bases, just in case. So
Okay,
thanks for having me on.
gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha. And see, I thought I was original with the whole Robert Herjavec, which I'm sure I'm not, because I mean you bear a striking resemblance. It's
I've,
amazing.
I have a very impressionable face. People are able to see a lot of things, which is interesting. Just so.
Yeah, that's yeah, all right. That's cool. Hey, at least memorable is what you want to be, especially in business, right? But so ESG Rack, when I see ESG Rack, let's get into that. Just tell us what it is, and then I want to hear about your journey too. But your latest thing or what you're doing here, you're doing a couple of things, right? So, but ESG Rack is at the top of your list, and when I see Rack, I think of rack diesel pricing and rack plus or minus 1% fuel. Is it along those lines? Is that what we're looking at here? What is ESG rack?
Yep. So ESG Rack is intended to be a location for storing the evidence associated with sustainability, corporate responsibility, ESG efforts in a way where they can be permanently protected. So that, for example, if you say, hey, we did this 1 month, you go back next month, it says the same thing, right? That's one of our biggest challenges in ESG is the consistency of our statements of what we're doing. And so we run a clearinghouse that takes those statements in the little chunks in which they're done. So let's say, for example, I saved 1,000,000 gallons of water this last month, and it takes that evidence in a redacted form and allows that redacted evidence to be connected into an item called a regenerative authentication credit. So RAC stands for Regenerative Authentication Credit. It is essentially a contracting vehicle that identifies who did the good work, what is the intangible value of that good work that is there, and where's the evidence that you're willing to share with the world to prove that good work, while allowing you a blockchain validated storage that allows you to save that unredacted, save that protected, that information that is sensitive somewhere else, and hold the thumbprint of it within the system in the rack itself. So the rack itself is a means for whether you're in logistics, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in anything that has an ESG value to it, to be able to take that information, protect what you share with individuals, and make sure that its occurrence has been permanent to the point where people can have comfort working with you and knowing that there's some third-party validation of these improvements you've been making. So that's rack
Gotcha.
itself on the top end.
All right. Yeah, cool. So it's not even close to what impressed my mind at first. But yeah, it's very interesting. So reading through it and going through that was one of my questions was okay, you've got all this stuff in there. Blockchain is the security code on top of this thing, right? That's where people are seeing that third party authenticity of you. Does that confirm that you did this or that this is your data?
Yeah. So what the blockchain piece confirms really, and this is where, I apologize because in background, one of the things that's important to remember about me is I started my career as a modeler, as an analyst, a failure analyst. I started in the aerospace industry working with rockets, and so there's
Okay.
a lot of these new techs that I will get sometimes, sort of brutally cynical about quickly, right? And blockchain is one of those that has a very valuable capability, but it is incredibly limited. And we're using blockchain for its incredibly limited value. And the
Gotcha.
incredibly limited value that blockchain has is when a piece of data is in the system, it can prove to you that if I see that data again, it can say, yep, this is the exact same data that I saw before at this point in the system. Nothing's been modified. Nothing's been changed. It is exactly the same. right? So if I'm looking at that as a value prop here, when you're looking at compliance, what blockchain can do is it can cut your cost of authenticating a document to an instant in something that if I went to court otherwise would cost me 20 grand for someone to say, well, I can't see that's that wrong, right? But that's the end of it. It can't disprove a negative. It does nothing at making sure the data in there is better if the data that fed in is bad, right? It only is able to say, this is the evidence that I've seen. This evidence hasn't actually changed. So it can protect
Mm.
you from Volkswagen, for example, right? When you look at the Volkswagen issue, that was an issue of, boy, they just went and changed the date on the back end, said it's this, and then all of a sudden you go and do an audit, and you're like, oh boy, that's not the same.
Mm.
Blockchain can stop that. Blockchain can go and actually ensure that there is permanence, which we argue truth is permanence, because people can have different truths, right? Some can say, "Oh, I think that house is green," and someone says that house is red. Well,
Yeah, yeah, and to your point of maintaining that truth is hard because you remember we remember things, and over the years, it's not that it's like the fish story gets bigger and better and better, better, better. But
mm-hmm,
in reality, our mind remembers the last time we remembered it, so it
mm-hmm,
changes in our mind legitimately,
mm-hmm,
right? But
right.
this and in business that can happen as well, but this says no, this is the authentic document. This is what the data said at this time, and you can be sure that that was accurate.
Correct. And I think what's most important about the blockchain piece is the second part of it, which is once you know the first part, which is it can only verify positives, right? And it can only verify positives of what it's seen before. The second piece is it can do that with things that no one else has actually seen the original data for, right? I mean, what we say is if I keep that data somewhere else, keep it fully protected. One of your biggest challenges in logistics, for example, is you have a whole bunch of parties to a transaction, like in the renewable
Hmm.
fuel space, right?
Sure.
Where your waste product comes from that turns into renewable fuels, turns into SAF, the renewable diesel, those sort of items, where that data comes from is highly sensitive. It's highly commercially valuable. I don't want to just be sharing with the world, hey, here's the address and name of everything, and here's all my pictures, and yada, 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 right? I want to
Yeah.
protect that information, but the other party needs to know it exists. So if there is an audit, they need to know that something's back there that I can go to. Blockchain, by allowing you to take a digital thumbprint of that data and store that digital thumbprint in a way that says, hey, if you ever actually audit me, by the way, you'll know that this is what you can compare that data to. And if it's good, it means it's exactly the same. If it's not, we can dig into why it's different. But that ability to essentially have a third party check that that data has remained permanent, that you haven't all of a sudden gone through a different audit and changed all this other logistics stuff. That's always like, oh boy, we screwed up and the truck actually went there instead of there, right? And we just fixed it in the back end or however we
Yeah.
want to deal with it. The fact that you can actually have these little anchors of truth throughout logistics system is in some ways more valuable than even knowing exactly what that item is because logistics is messy, right? Production is
Yeah.
messy. There's a lot of uncertainty. The question is, how do I get to a certain amount of uncertainty that reduces the risk that I have of being surprised or reduces the risk of what I'm going to actually be getting? And at the heart of sustainability, corporate responsibility, all we can get to many times is a certain level of certainty about what occurred, and making it permanent is what blockchain can give us some access to do. But it won't cure cancer. It won't, we're not using it to actually make some crazy coin that's going to go off and like get you AMC stock for or something like that, right? I mean, it's purely saying that
Yeah.
in its true value, you can protect your sensitive data however you need to protect it until that audit comes in. And once that audit comes in, this is able to give that third party, certainty in every court in the world since 2012, certainty that your data has not been modified or adjusted in any way since the time it was originally seen in that network. And that's the
I
scope of how we use it. Is our system, our clearinghouse for ESG racks is again, it's paper based because that's how accountants and lawyers and people work, right? We deal in documents that say this is the actual document, this is our evidence, these are these pieces that I could take to court. And the blockchain piece is purely just to say, It's been unmodified. You can be certain it's remained this way since the first time you saw it, even though it's never come into our system, the evidence itself. The evidence itself stays on your side, and all that arrives is the verification, the hash, so to speak, what we call a thumbprint that arrives in that blockchain and remains there to ensure permanence of the truth throughout that time.
Okay. And then discovery of that truth would only be under a litigation type of event or a contract
Mhm.
execution event. Is
Yeah,
that
or
what we're
whatever.
talking?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, anything that like, let's say for example, we have some clients where um, the buyer is not allowed to see all the data down to origin, but their auditors must because the government must. Right now,
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay.
so the buyer may want to say, "Hey, we need to see 5 or 10% sample of all the records you have, just to make sure that we know they're there and we're comfortable
Yeah.
going forward."
Yeah.
So we have, for example, in the grease space, fats, oils, and greases, we actually have a compliance system. It's a supply chain compliance system. It works for anything that's fluid-like, right? So fluids are hard, right? Because it's not like a Nike where it's like, oh, shoe 563 is on the shelf, and then I go somewhere and I can pull 563 back off. In fluids, every time you co-locate them, I don't have a bunch of different pounds of one and the other. I have a new product, right? Fluids are probabilistic in nature. And so the fact is, every single time I start co-locating through a process, especially a continual flow process, the reality is you can't FIFO that. That's not correct.
Yeah.
So you have to actually have what we've built, which is the very first live tank model in the waste grease space. But it applies to anything that's fluid like, right? Fluid like would be organic carrots. Organic carrots are fluid like. I can identify this patch of 1/10 of an acre and say, oh, I pulled it up from this patch, right? And I could theoretically blockchain that 1/10 of an acre. But once they go in the bin, I can't tell which carrot's which, right? That becomes a fluid. my
Oh,
my
yeah.
my bin of carrots become a fluid, and now I have a probabilistic model of what's my carrot, right? Every carrot now is probabilistic in nature. Scrap fabric. Scrap fabric, I can know this stuff came out of this factory, but once it goes into the bins, it's a fluid.
Okay, so let me help me wrap my brain around this.
Yeah,
So
sorry. I know we've gone
no,
wide ranging.
no, this is
So yeah,
fantastic stuff. It's fantastic. Obviously, you were a high school dropout, but
my parents have been mad ever since about it. That's true. So uh,
the so is this in my mind in this starts to take me to content, right? And proving content of product. Is that what that's the use case you're looking at right there, right?
Yeah, so if you think of end to end for us, right, the first layer is in our compliance system, which our first branded compliance system under the rack is called Grease Track. And it basically can tell you for every truck, any rail car of this product that ships, we basically build out a quality label. That quality label basically says within this truck, this is the percentage of every single collection that went into this truck, right? And it's a probabilistic model. It says, for example, from Denny's on Old Farm Road, the
Yeah,
pickup from June 28th at 3:20 in the morning, 1.23% of that pickup is in this truck, right? That's our first piece, and that again works for any type of fluid, whether it be,
got you.
hey, I cleaned up all these organic carrots in here, right? At the end of the day, every bin that rolls out, every truck that rolls out is really going to have a probabilistic breakup of here's all the patches those carrots came from, or every fabric scrap that goes into fabric recycling will have that. So our first layer is, to your point, I think to your point earlier, which was a very, very valid and important one, is how do you prove the evidence that you have is real, right?
Yeah,
What's associated with reality? And in the
yeah,
logistics side, our first step is we've built really cool, and it's the first in the fats, oils, and greases space for renewable fuel standard stuff that's on the actual collector side. It's the first what's called live tank modeling. We can give you a probabilistic list of qualities of everything in that tank. That's the first piece. The
yeah.
second piece is almost all of that is put together with evidence that you just don't want to send, to the EPA and have it out in the world or anything. It's evidence you want to protect. And so your counterparty needs to know that you're collecting that evidence. And more importantly, the government needs to actually see it if they ever ask. And so our next layer of the system is a visibility component that says, fine, keep your evidence in whatever location you want, or we can be a third party if you want us to be and hold those pieces you need to. But for your customer, we can set up, hey, you can see a percentage of these pieces of evidence, not the whole thing. We're concerned about our customer list, but all of them, all that data can be thumbprint backed, so that if someone says, you know what, no, I need this, or the government says, hey, I need to see collection number 563 from X, Y, and D to Denny's Old Farm Road, then you can say, all right, here's the data. By the way, the hash matches exactly the hash that existed before, so you know it's the exact same thing. And because you don't see this hash anywhere else again in the system, you know the evidence is going to be different than any other evidence in the system, which allows you to have that certainty of your truth without handing over all your sensitive data from the get-go. And then the last piece on top of that is the public visibility for whether it be your supply chain management folk to make sure that it's clear this has happened, your counterparties and your accountants who can, go through and say, hey, you told me that 10 loads came through. All right, give me 10 ingredients labels. We can say, all right, log in and check out your 10. And off you can go safely and check out your 10. Or more broadly, and this is where the Hugh Valuation Summit and those sort of things come in, is any ESG or other effort that we're making, a lot of it struggles to say, well, show me what evidence you did, and make sure if I go back in there, if you're making a claim to value on that ESG evidence, if you're making a claim to value on your water reduction, if you're making claim to value on your decarbonization, if you're making claim to value on your books and your company for food recovery, for feeding your local community, all those other ESG targets that exist, the first part is you need to have some clearinghouse of evidence that they're there, that someone can go back to, if we're going to allow that monetization of that to occur as an intangible value to your company. And so we, in a lot of ways, depending on what the product is, we either start at the base level for fluid-like materials, but we aren't agnostic and say you must be here. If someone says, here's my evidence, we can now keep it in a third-party protected manner that they can go back and show that evidence. And for those who have the desire to transfer that evidence, and this is where the name RAC comes from, that contract, the RAC that stores the evidence of my work, also has an ability to transfer that intangible value exactly like a REC, a renewable energy certificate. So if I make green wind energy, for example, in Iowa, we have 54% renewably generated electricity, but Iowa citizens receive zero green energy. Zero.
Really? It's all piped out.
It all gets split off through RECs. It gets sent to data centers, and we as Iowans get null energy. So every data center in Iowa is green. Every data center in Iowa is fully renewable. Every data center is fully balanced on their energy usage, but that's because the RECs get separated. When you look at California, right? You can either in California pay a few cents a kilowatt hour to get green energy that's generated and is green, is actually truly yours, or you can buy RECs at 10% of that to actually meet the same objective. And I would argue, actually put that investment in regions where it's needed more. Because California has a very good region, renewable energy footprint, right? And the Pacific Northwest is doing great with all their hydro and everything else, right? There's other places, like you're in Chattanooga and like us, and Iowa's actually come a whole long ways in a very short amount of time because of RECs, and because that investment through the offset is actually putting the money where it's needed to the area where the good work can be done. And our system goes and allows that to occur for everything from, right now, water quality is our big one. Water is a big thing that doesn't have a real carbon credit to it, that doesn't have a true system to it. We, with our compliance, and then the RAC itself, allow for the investment in those water projects to occur in a cheaper way for the actual group that is supporting it, and for that investment to occur exactly where it's needed, right? Not everyone's going to put a data center next to a river that needs cleaned, but I can promise you that Des Moines requires over $750,000 per day in planting season to make sure our water is drinkable.
Yeah.
Well, you should get some credit for cleaning the water here, right? if you
Yeah.
do it. And that's
Yeah.
what the rack does, exactly like a rec, is it transfers the intangible value of that good work that you're doing, specifically beyond carbon as our focus, because most things aren't carbon, right? And it's protected in the clearinghouse. And if it's something that is actually within the wheelhouse, i.e., fluid like material throughout the supply chain, we can provide support for proving that the event occurred the way you said it occurred, all the way down to origin as well.
Gotcha. So this so explain how the offset exactly works. How does that exactly work? Who's going to look into these racks and invest money in these racks to basically they're getting the credits. They're getting the RAC, which is what regenerative authenticity credit, right? So I can purchase a credit, right, to offset, right?
Correct.
Does my offset have to be the same as what you're doing? So you mentioned Denny's. So okay, I'm Waffle House.
Mhm.
can, can I buy Denny's racks and then and it helped? I mean, seriously, it's a kind of a
Mhm.
silly thing, but it is a good analogy, right? Explain that aspect of it for.
Yep. Yeah. So when you're looking at the rack itself, right? Again, it works exactly like a rec, and it is an item that, yes, the seller has the right to identify who they want to go to. So let's say Denny's has done some good sustainability thing, right? Let's say Denny's has done for those of us college dropouts or for high school dropouts who are needing late meals. Let's say that there's some social good to them doing that, right? Let's say Denny's goes and says, "Hey, I want to count the social good of feeding drunk dropouts at 2 in the morning," right? And they create a rack for that. They say, "Hey, I can prove that I had 53 drunk dropouts last night at 3 a.m." And they say, "I think there's a social good to this. I want to make available to the market." Let's say Waffle House is, kicked out too many drunk dropouts that night, and they want to buy that Denny's credit and claim the goodness on their books that Denny created. The first step there is, yes, Denny's has the ability to say, no, you can't buy that. I don't want you to have that for whatever
Yeah,
reason there is, right?
yeah,
So similarly, let's say you're a um, you know save the forests group that's planting trees, and you're actually now generating a rack for the actual soil quality of your work, right? This is something we only think about trees for carbon, and when you're looking at the carbon markets and trees, it's a terrible market, right? I mean, you
yeah, yeah.
the
It's not all that
the
great, is
I
it?
mean, it's if there was a better way to think about fraud, I'm not sure what it is, right? But if you're looking at the value of, for example, soil health in forests, right? I mean, that's a big value there, the erosion
Yeah,
reduction. If you're looking at the
yeah,
value of, and not just forests, but prairies for the root structure that goes in there. There's all kinds of other values that aren't carbon. Since 97 we've been completely focused on carbon, and we've tried to do these backflips to get everything into carbon. And that's because when ozone, it turns out the hole wasn't that big, and I guess we forgot about Montreal and the ozone problem. So then in 97 with Kyoto, we're like, well, let's do carbon instead, because now the ozone's fixed, we're gonna have all this carbon, now we're in trouble. And I'm
well,
not
you
saying
got rid of all those fluorocarbons, dude. That's
everything's, yeah, we fixed it, right? Now that the hole's closed, well, now we're keeping all the carbon. I mean, before there must have been like a smokestack on the planet where all the carbon was leaving or something. I don't
yeah.
know.
Well,
So
unintended consequences, my friend.
exactly. And so, but one of the unintended consequences of our almost myopic focus on carbon since 97 is, we're trying to turn everything into a carbon credit, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
water doesn't have carbon in it by definition, right? And I know the argument of, okay, but what are we doing? We're creating all these carbon credits with all these other ancillary add-ons to try and address the real issue. What our goal with RAC instead is, let's just create a contract to transfer the value that's specifically identified. So in the case of
and hence the ESG and not just a carbon rack.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
that's what I was going to go to. It's way more than just fluids. It's way more than just carbon. It's the E, the S, and the G,
Yes.
right? Which carbon
Yes.
is a really teeny part of that in its true sense. But I agree with you. Headline porn or whatever you want to call it has created carbon. It's either carbon credits or you're not doing anything.
And this is the problem. So when you start to look at, our first use of this contracting vehicle that we did, and this isn't to say it's not, being done everywhere, which it is in a lot of places, but it's being done without transparency. It's inefficiently. And that's where there's a need for the rack. So back in 2012, United States Green Building Council used to have under V3 SS55 was one of the most useful tools for connecting green buildings to rural communities that I've ever seen. And what it allowed for was if you're doing habitat restoration on your site and you're in like New York or DC where you have no habitat, you could instead go and contract with someone else operating in a regenerative manner, and those could earn you 2 points for your building. Well, could be, water reclamation projects in southwest Iowa. Or what we found was habitat protection restoration, where we were able to get a farmer, and this is Seth Watkins out of Pinhook Farm was our first guy working with us on this, which was we could pay him about $500 to $1,300 per acre to protect shagbark hickory, which is a vital habitat for Indiana bats. And these buildings all over the coast would pay for it because they just needed 2 points. And the price of that was set based on the cost of getting any other credit within the LEED system. So that exact arbitrage opportunity that was hypothesized back in the 60s about if we can start assigning ownership to pollutants and we can start allowing for that trade of them, this is one of those perfect examples of I have a group that has a need, which is they need 2 points for their USGBC LEED rating, existing buildings, EBO and MV3. They need 2 points. Their price point is X. The cost of the farmer, I mean, his was like maybe cost 75 to 130 is what it costs to actually do reduced grazing and do the right fencing and do all the right things to actually make this habitat meaningful, right? If you plowed them all under, he's not going to make any more than 125 per acre, right? So we're now providing an incentive to not only not damage it, but actually improve and regenerate that area, right?
Yeah.
And nothing in it had anything to do with carbon. It had to do with restorative habitat. And those opportunities are existing all over the place right now, but they're
Yeah.
being done in side deals. We know data centers right now are going out and paying to reclaim farm ponds, right? We know that in data centers right now, the water usage is immense, right? We're aware of the energy, which you have a rec side. We're aware of the carbon in a lot of these embodied carbon pieces, right? But the water is an item where you can either go and reclaim a river, which there's means to do that you can gain that credit from, right? We're saying, hey, we just like that actual activity to be a little more transparent, right? Right now, we
Yeah.
know the majors are going off and doing these side deals to roll out a project. We know that if we can actually just put that tracking somewhere else, everyone can actually be paid a fair amount to do the good work that could, for example, the Raccoon River, which supplies massive amounts of polluted water to Des Moines every single year, and Iowa in total supplies 55% of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico comes from Iowa, which is 1% of the nation's population. We supply 55% of the problem within the Missouri River. But there's some really cool technologies out there where you could, Biochar Now LLC is a group we work with, and we actually have some credits that we're actually brokering for them to data center uses, right? You could clean the Raccoon River for less than $20 million using some of these slow paralysis biochar activated filtration systems.
Gotcha.
And you're
Yeah.
talking about the amount you're saving, right, of that, and that intangible value for doing that and running that project could now be transferred through the rack to a data center for less than 20% of what it would cost to actually roll out that project.
Yeah, but you
That's
have
what
to
the rack
find
provides.
somebody on the other side. It's almost like a financial, like a hedging financial instrument. You got to find somebody on the other side that's going to gain value from that rack, right?
Yep.
In order to support that, right? So there's got to be somebody who says, okay, look, I need to show some positive impacts in my ESG. I personally can't do it because of, or corporately can't do it because of whatever reasons, restrictions, but these guys can. So let me pay these guys to do this to get. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? There's got to be somebody on the other side that does that. How about? But let me ask you this: what if all of the what if the profit? What if the not profit, but the value is internal? So, for instance, let's take Iowa farming.
Yep.
Now, Iowa from my knowledge of agricultural plastics, is not a huge user of poly mulch, right? The white sheeting plastics, just because of the crops. There's far bigger states and areas that consume it, like California berry farms and the melon farms, in in Florida, the tomato farms in Tennessee and Georgia, et cetera, right? They consume and use billions of pounds of this poly mulch,
Mm-hmm.
which has very, very positive impacts along with very negative impacts at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Can a rack or Rex be used to balance that within itself? Or does there have to be this third party? Because it seems to me like you've got two parties in the same place.
Yep. And Michael, this is the perfect segue question. And it's funny that we have not met before. And so this is actually that perfect piece is now, yes, the rack, if you think about the rack itself, the rack is the embodiment of the asset, the embodiment of the intangible value. But the question is, what's it worth, right? Number one, what's it worth? And number two, let's say I have that exact same thing that does two different potentially offsetting items. Well, how do I value those two components, right? And that's where the HUE, or the Human Impact Unit, which we devised with some partners a few years ago. This quick background, one of the other things that I do when I'm not dropping out of high school is I'm a visiting scholar at Indiana University's Ostrom Workshop.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
Ostrom Workshop, Ostrom Economics is the tragedy
Hey,
that commons.
just to
Oh,
set
sorry.
the record, just to set the record straight, you do have degrees and actually a PhD from Glasgow, right? University of Glasgow, and you also graduated from Berkeley, right?
I mean, I could have
So,
paid more attention my first run at college. That's true. But
well, yeah,
it was a,
yeah. So my tongue in cheek comment about Chris being a high school dropout was completely BS.
oh,
People,
yeah. I thought we were both joking about this. I was going to say, yes, that is not an admission that you're correct.
I just
I
want to
even,
clarify
yeah.
to anybody who out there is going to run it. Well, I mean, this is a topic, Chris. Seriously, this is a topic that has people on the other side of the fence, right?
Mm-hmm,
I mean, when you start talking about carbon credits and stuff like that, and this is not a carbon credit, but it is a very
mm-hmm,
similar structure, utilizing blockchain, et cetera. Highly volatile, polarizing topics on both sides. And I happen to be with you on what you're doing here. And I don't want people to go, well, see, I mean, it's run by a bunch of high school dropouts who got caught, drunk in a Denny's at 3 o'clock in the morning, throwing
yeah.
grease into a truck. And that's not what we're talking about here.
Luckily, those are our competitors. Luckily, so don't worry. That's
All right,
completely
fantastic.
different market. And don't worry, you don't have to listen to us talk about Bitcoin at you either. If you actually deal with us, this is not a Bitcoin dinner play. Don't worry. I won't try and tell you about how we're going to hit 5 billion per coin.
No,
But
this is all about Doge.
yeah, yeah. In some ways, there's parallels, but no, I think in that,
But
though, I think that, well, there is, in all seriousness, a fundamental parallel there, which is you have to look at, with the Ostrom side, right? When you're looking at what Ostrom economics is how do we avoid the tragedy of the commons, which is overfishing, overgrazing? How do we collectively deal with um, resource overuse and resources that seem like they're abundant, but actually have access to scarcity if we all are misusing them, right? And when you're looking at those issues in that framing, the challenge is, well, what are these things worth, right? On one side, if carbon isn't our best denominator, which it is not, right? If you're looking at this example on the plastic side, right? We have some benefits on that side. And the question is, well, what's the value of my benefit that my CFO could book, right? Well, what's the value of my negative on the other side? And how do we balance them? If I just use carbon, you're going to be in mental contortions forever, which is why the human impact unit, what the theory of it is, and the purpose of the conference that we're having in June is to go and test those theories, is to apply it to 12 different projects, programs, startups that are dealing evenly in E's, S's, and G's, and says, if I'm going to evaluate what you're doing in a human impact unit framework, how much is it worth? In the plastic side, the way we would look at this is we say, okay, here's the plus side of it, right? How much good are you doing relative to the size of the problem you're addressing?
Mm-hmm.
That becomes your hue. And if I know my hue and I know the hue equivalent of something else that is in a traded space,
Yeah.
I can now price it. For example, water quality, right? We know within Iowa that our agricultural runoff, when looking at the community associated with, through their action or inaction, allowing the runoff to occur, we know that that equals roughly 7.45 tons per year per person in that community, in that producer community.
Okay.
So what we're saying is a hue, an actual human equivalent solving of that problem, must get rid of 7.45 tons of runoff. Well,
Okay.
if I
Okay.
want to price that, I would say, well, theoretically, there's no reason a hue of water reclamation should it be worth a hue of carbon sequestration, right? Well,
Right.
in
Well,
America,
other than popular notion, right?
oh, correct. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but this is the challenge, right? Is going to
Yeah.
be
It is.
so if we follow that, if we follow the logic of a hue, which is if we assume that sustainability, corporate responsibility, those things are the addressing or the de-risking, the improvement of resiliency in issues that are either human made through action or inaction, then I should have transparent pricing through that with that same denominator. And if I do, luckily for carbon, for example, I know, while, for example, if I take an international view, the average human emits on the order of 6.4 metric tons per year of CO2 equivalents, right? But in the United States, I emit 16.4. So my hue of carbon in the United States should be more costly than my hue of carbon elsewhere because there are significant regional variations. But if I do know my equivalent hue for an equivalent project, I should be able to price it because I have all kinds of different carbon pricings, depending on which carbon pricing you think is most appropriate. Like, for example, if we use EOETS, for example, right, which in the first quarter, well, it's down now, but in the first quarter, if you look in the first quarter, is roughly about 85 euros or so, right? Well, if you use that pricing, that means a hue of carbon, right? Hue of carbon emissions is worth about $1,492. Well, that 1494 should, if that 1492 should be equal to a hue of water reclamation. So if I do, recover 7.3 tons, that should be worth 1492. Or if I do a hue of food recovery, feeding
Yeah. As long
insecure
as you know the
people,
hue, then you can do an exchange rate, is what you're saying.
correct.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what the conference is saying. Let's test that theory. Let's
Well, that
test our
theory
exchange
makes
rate.
it makes a lot of sense. So a farm that has got, you've measured the hue on the erosion. Let's just go with just the soil erosion, the runoff. By utilizing X amount of polymulch, they can reduce their number of hues by 17 or whatever it happens to be. That exchange rate versus now whatever you want to call the negative impacts of that polymulch, whether it be the carbon footprint of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is true. Virgin plastic has a carbon footprint, and or the I don't know that they have one, or if you developed any negative impact for that plastic, because it either gets burned or goes into a landfill. There's very little recycling of it. How does that hue translate to this? And you may have a farm, by bringing in the plastics, is running even on their ESG based on those two different racks and the balance thereof of their value, or their perceived value.
Exactly.
Am I getting
Yep,
that right?
that is exactly right. So where you would need in that case the third party component is not to say that, hey, I'm going to transfer this or something else, but it could be for those investors that say, hey, how much polymulch came in here, right? What is the actual balance here? And having something, having a repository that actually at least stores that evidence in a redacted manner is
Sure.
something that is going to be of value in that supply chain, because you're going to have to actually hit an audit sometime, right? Your auditors think very,
Eventually you will. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
where auditors think very straightforwardly. It's saying, hey, you told me there's 10 of these. I see 10 pieces of paper. All right, cool. These 10 pieces of paper say this. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but we need to provide systems that allow them to do their job in an efficient manner. Otherwise, we get stuck in these, analysis paralysis for days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Analysis to
so,
profit. Quite familiar.
and
Yeah.
so the balance is, number one, can we provide the paperwork in a protected way that ensures that people can prove what they've done? Yes.
Yeah.
With the hue, can we value what's been done here in a way that's beyond carbon? Yeah, that's what we would agree. And that balance from there, can we actually allow for that transfer of it or balance of it, regardless of what your need for that balance is, in a way that the CFO can actually say, oh, I can see you've taken this hue multiplied by this index, right? The CFO usually doesn't want to dive into the intricacies of the ESG part, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've got dashboards for days, and if you put any of them in front of a CFO, they glaze over instantly, like, oh my God, what can I book on this, right? We just need to give them a two variable model. Here's the hue, here's the index we're using against it, right? Let the debate happen as whether that index is right, whether it should be an EU carbon credit or it should be a biochar carbon pricing, right? I mean, there's, in that alone, there's about $160 a difference, whether it should be just a deforestation valuation of in the $3 to $6. Whatever we want to debate is what that actual index is for pricing that hue. The fact is, the hue itself, and being able to compare ESG qualities in a non-carbon manner, is vitally important for us to be able to come to investment, return on investment, and most importantly, project valuations that right now are getting zero credit, right? People say, hey, I got this ESG stuff. How much is this worth? How can you price it? Well, I know, here's the good of it, does this, that, and the other, and I got a dashboard that says my answer is 1632.7. Oh, okay, zero. I mean, that's the answer right now at the actual accountant level. If we can say, well, no, yeah, I know this is a water project and this is a plastic reduction project. I know this is a anti-poverty project, right? Well, I can convert those to hue, and I can now put a bookable item on my bottom line that hits my market capitalization, that
Yeah.
you aren't able to do with certainty before.
Yeah, no, that I understand that completely. What is going through in my mind is, how mature is this market? Because you're talking, there has to be, on the other side, for instance, there has to be, like you mentioned, it hits this index or that index. Are those indexes there in place? Like, if how the proliferation of these markets, how mature are they? How saturated are they? I mean, I get carbon credits. You can do carbon credits. That's pretty easy to do this right now. But water credits, plastic credits, these different credits that you would have to do to be able to do your exchange rate and your hue index and all that other kind of stuff. How mature are they? I mean, is this something that somebody can reach out to you today and go, hey, look, I got this problem, and you're going to have an answer? Or are we still developing many of those markets?
Yeah, and this is where there's two pieces here, which is, one is sort of the fallacy of carbon credits in the voluntary market, right? And the other
Yeah,
is, maturity in general, right? So I would
sure,
say, if
sure.
you're looking at the, voluntary offset market in carbon, that is still a whole lot more Wild West than I think people want to admit,
Well,
right?
there's been a lot of news of people getting sued and investigations going, this was 90% inaccurate or this was 70% inaccurate and stuff like that. So yeah, I would have to say I totally understand what you're saying. Agree.
And so that's why I'm saying again, we partner with brokers who are able to actually go and sell these. And a lot of this, though, the pricing of any of these credits, right, in the carbon space, for example, right, we're supporting again, a biochar-based credit that's actually insured. The credit itself, it actually is insured
Oh,
and
okay.
reinsured. And so, if you buy it, it's insured for the life of the credit, right? It's ISCC Plus certified, which means that because it's actually a kiln-based approach, it means that you can know that this is the amount of carbon embodied when you use that product in a water reclamation part. Because the reclamation comes from binding of materials to it, you can actually measure the amount of phosphorus you pulled out or the amount of
Sure.
metals you pulled out. So even in those ones where it is incredibly tight, you have a top 5 international reinsurer, or one of the top 5 biggest insurance companies in the world reinsures these things,
Okay.
right? As in, you'll never lose money on this. The fact is, in that actual carbon world, which is different than the registries. Registries and a lot of your insurance basically say, oh yeah, trust us, this is on here. And number 2, okay, we'll give you insurance on the paperwork. So we'll prove the paperwork is right. Well, that doesn't help me if the actual trees weren't real, right? But my paper is good,
And
right?
that's what part of the problem has been, right? The trees just weren't real,
That
right?
is the full problem. The full
Yeah.
problem is that we have been looking at the intangible value definition, and most people have not understood it. Or more importantly, which is different than the RAC, is that we have too often in ESG said that there is certainty in things that are variables, right?
Yeah. Okay.
The issue is, if I buy a contract that says I have a contract for sequestering this amount of carbon from this forest of trees, well, you can't really measure that, right? It's a model.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental
True.
model. So the fact
Yeah.
is, those models have variables in them, right? When you look at California, did a study of the last 10 years of all those, and they showed, oh boy, this didn't do anything, right? I mean, the models are always going to be variable. And for people who are modelers and engineers like myself, it's like, well, I'm sort of comfortable with that. But when a regular human says, hey, by the way, you get to own this car, and by the way, it's going to have somewhere between 0 and 16 wheels on it, right? You're going to be like, okay, I get a car, right? But that's not really what you got, right? And
Yeah.
so when we have tools that allow the value of truth to be an uncertain quality, it loses confidence in the world, because your objective consideration of truth is, no, you told me I'd get a car. That's 4 wheels and I can jump in it, right? It's not like one wheel sitting in the trunk and nothing else on, right? And that's a lot of what the carbon market has been, because it's all around modeling. And most people, the human brain cannot deal with the fact that 5 is rarely less than 8. But it is. And so with the rack, what we've done is basically identified the rack is on the tangible, auditable action. And then you define the intangible value you're transferring, and that needs its own value. And that's always going to be an uncertain value. In that market, when you're selling it, unfortunately, just like a carbon credit, it comes down to what the buyer's comfortable with, right? If you have a fully insured carbon credit for a product that's 92, 95% pure with 100% certainty because of its process, as per ICC Plus verification, that should be an instant buy. But even in the carbon space, that carbon market's still uncomfortable. It comes down to whether or not the actual buyer understands it. It comes down to whether or not it's within that space. And so in that regard, the carbon market is as uncertain as the rack market. The second piece to it is also, though, that the buyer and who is of interest to it, and in this space right now, there is an active market. It's just not transparent, right? When you have a data center saying, boy, I've got, for whatever reason I have it, I have an internal target where, I mean, our ability now to characterize the negative impacts of data centers is so sophisticated. It's one of the most impressive things I've seen in the analysis space. you can know this is how many million gallons of water I'm off for where I put this. And in most of those data centers, there's nothing you can do to make it better, right? I mean, it has to go in a certain place. And when you're there, there's only so many projects on site you can do. You have a gap. And if your company says, if Meta or if Google or if any of these big players say, man, you got to close that gap, and you're that data center provider, what do you have a need there? And they're right now going off and making these side deals for, hey, what if I do a water sequestration here? Or what if I cover this item here? All that's happening. That is a rack market. It's a
Yeah, it
highly
is.
inefficient rack market.
Right, 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 right.
It's not transparent. And we're trying to standardize and bring transparency into that
Yeah, no,
space.
I get it. You're
But it's
gathering the
new.
players. I get it. Yeah, makes sense.
And yeah, so I mean, to answer your question, is there another party on the other side of it? Yes, one of the reasons I was excited to meet you and talk with you is I promise you that you have nearly every sustainability VP or someone that's listening to your side has probably been in a meeting where every quarter they say, "What are we paying you for the sustainability stuff?" Right?
Oh yeah, no,
And
100% they are.
yeah, and their answer is, well, but look at all this good stuff we did. And the CFO says, I only speak in two variables. Give me two variables. And like, oh man. So,
They don't have them. Yeah.
but what we do is we provide you the two variables, number one.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
number
fantastic.
two, in the gap, we provide you the way to instantly make up that gap. Right now, we have 296 tons of water reclamation credits that are available right now. We have a large number that are coming online soon. We have 5 million tons of insured carbon credits that come out pace. So, I mean, there's these things are things that we know are available, accessible. And the
Now these
fact
are
is, sorry, yeah.
yeah, no, let me, and those are great things, and we're
We're
coming
way
up on
over
some
time. I'm
time
sorry.
here, and we got to talk. Well, yeah, no, and this is
Yeah.
fantastic. We can dive into this all day long, but does this one can say transportation companies utilize this information to overcome mandates or legislation like the recent ones in California, where your voluntary credits or whatever have to be proven, right? They can audit you. Now it's pretty unclear what you're going to get penalized for, but it sounds like they're going to penalize you pretty good. But this could be used for that type of situation as well, for defending greenwashing ish type of legislation or probes audits,
Yep.
right?
So yeah. So to clarify, there's two components, especially California LCFS and those sort of items. There's a few pieces there, right? So to make sure we're clear on what the scope of what we're able to do is, right? So those companies right now needing compliance, when you're looking at carbon, LCFS, and any similar items, right? There's the first piece where the company has to be tracking everything they do down to a level of certainty of this is the evidence that we have, right? And a lot of those programs, you're able to give the government a backdoor into your system and say, hey, okay, you can look around and see what you see and prove what you got to prove, right? So without any extra system, you could, you could meet what you're looking to do with your current system. Some people feel as part of the risk management strategy that they don't want to have all the stuff all there. They want to put the relevant stuff into a separate place and say, hey, here's a door, look into the separate stuff if you need to dive down into it. And we want to keep a full firewall that provides access to prove if you need to dive deeper, I'll be able to show you more. But this is where you start and stop, and it's a separate third-party data repository. When you're looking at RAC, that's the first primary value for those things in that LCFS, RFS, in
Gotcha.
that world. That's the first piece that where there's a major value is we just need someone else to store this so it isn't something that's coming back, or at the very least, we need you to store the redacted that we're willing to let the government see, right? With the audit trail or with the thumbprint that shows this is the evidence that's truly true, right? That's the
Gotcha.
first
Gotcha.
value piece. The second is with the rack itself. Now, depending on what that evidence is, if you're looking to transfer and if that program that you're dealing in allows for that transfer, yes, we can protect that audit trail of who owns the intangible value.
Gotcha.
But in itself, We are not we are not in itself an actual credit where you'd say, oh yeah, I'm just going to turn this rack to the government. No, we track the ownership of it. We track who's responsible, and we make sure that that data can be seen in a protected manner, especially in those supply chain situations. But we can eliminate the greenwashing at the point of saying you don't get double data, you can't double count. We can actually audit this quicker, but it
Yeah.
isn't something we can say, oh, yep, just turn in that rack and you're good to go, and the government's happy with you. Right?
Yeah, no, but you're
Still go.
providing them evidence and or data for them to present their case is what I'm saying. That's what
Correct.
it
Yep.
helps. So okay. So I got one other question here. I mean, there's a million questions, but one other one that I think is, I mean, it's at least important to my mind is the support for these racks. So in my mind, the thing I can just blurt out is subscription service, right? So if you said you've got X number of billions of tons of water coming on or whatever, have these water racks that are coming on, right? So if I'm a company, Michael Vincent Industries, and I need to offset 100 million gallons a year of water, right? I purchase your rack. That's good for X amount, right? And let's see, I
Mhm.
get 50 million, right? And I'm good with that. Okay, 50 million is great, and I get it every year. What if 10 million of those are in Chris Draper's company and I'm getting those racks from him, but he goes out of business?
Mhm.
Do you find me the other to make up for that, or do then I need to go figure that out? I mean, where are the services there? Because a rack is only good for the production on the other side, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So if that ends, what occurs? I
Yeah,
guess.
so I think this gets into the issue of what's an actual existing versus what's a forward delivery contract, right? So if you're
Correct.
looking at
Correct.
right now, when you're looking at the 293 tons that are available right now, those are for actions that have already occurred, right? So as a rack can only be generated for an action that's occurred, right? And so
Okay.
if you have a rack, we say, hey, this is the evidence, this is what happened. You own the intangible value of this. A rack, exactly like a rec. Recs aren't forward looking either, right? And carbon credits themselves are not forward looking, right? Once the credit's there, that's happened, we're good to go, right? If you have cases of fraud where like they say, yeah, 50,000 trees were planted and like 10 were, that's a different issue than forward
Yeah,
delivery,
totally
right?
different issue. But it is
In a
forward looking on my side if I purchase the rec. Like I'm going to need a 14 tons of water offsets for my upcoming year. So I buy 14 that already occurred, and then I'm kind of like, once I hit my
Yep.
14, now okay, auditing wise, those have been met, but I've got to find another 14 for next year, right?
Correct. And that is always going to be a brokerage issue, just like any other
Yeah,
market. We're no different than
gotcha.
that, right? So I think there's always going to be counterparty risk, which is why actually the
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, I could become a broker for you and just say, okay, and I'll find it for them. Like every year, you need 14, right?
hey, I
I'll
won't
put you down for 14 every year. Is that what I want, Chris? Is that what you need? I'll get that happening. Like, all
I
right.
will not fight you on that. And Charlie LePage, I am positive will enjoy the help. So because
Yeah, there you go.
we got a guy named Charlie who's friggin' awesome. And so if there are folk who need, for example, data centers are going to there's no way for data centers right now to cover their water quality issues with on-site actions, and many are in companies that don't have the ability to cover it otherwise internally, similar to your plastic issue, right? I think that when you're looking at that, this is a solution when you're pricing it out. Even with our Hue Guide price, um, it's it is the cheapest way to solve your water quality gap, right? I mean, when Charlie, I think, was pricing recently with one of I did the original Hue analysis when on it. And when you're looking at it, you're saving 95% of the cost of what would be the alternative, putting in a project that would get you this much value, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so when you're looking forward, um, yes, there is going to be a theoretical risk that, hey, if this company doesn't do any more remediations, can I get them there? Maybe not, but I can promise you there is almost no way that there will not be enough projects that need to occur within our country that we cannot find another path for those
yeah.
credits.
Not
Yeah.
not for the foreseeable future that I see. I agree with you 100%.
Well,
Yeah, I
this
don't
is
think there's any doubt. I don't think there's any doubt at all.
Well, and this is where, again, a lot of times people, when we get, as you say, there's some significant polls in this industry, right? And one of the polls is basically saying, hey, carbon is everything because it's the root of climate, right? And that I don't disagree that, climate change is massive, right? I don't disagree that a boiling frog has real problems, but a poisoned frog is dead.
Yeah. Oh,
So
100%. Yeah.
when you're looking at the racks, a lot of challenges people sometimes raises, and the hue and the way we calculate hue, they're like, well, but won't we just fix the low hanging fruit first? I'm like, yeah, fix the low hanging fruit first. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm cool with that. Let's fix the low hanging fruit. Let's
Yeah.
provide value to those people who identify it. Let's let them book it. Companies that are doing the right thing should have a 5% value premium in their goodwill line item that they can't justify right now. Give it to them, right? I mean,
Fantastic.
that's
Yeah.
that's the whole point of the hue. That's a whole point of proving the evidence. That's the whole point of allowing good companies who are doing excess to transfer that value to ones that need help within structures, right? And no one wants to say, hey, yeah, I want to transfer, this stuff from good company to evil empire, right? You still get control. It's still your asset. You don't have to sell someone something, right? But sustainability managers right now are under heat because they're struggling to translate the value of their non-carbon benefits in a way that the CFO can understand so the CEO can approve. The Hue prices those, the rack proves them, and this is what we can do to provide that dream of triple bottom line or cradle to cradle or all those things we've been talking about for 30 years and not doing. If it doesn't hit the bottom line, the capitalization, a monetary translation for that company, the decision owners can't do it. It has to go to EBITDA. And we have a means to put that on EBITDA. And if you look and actually close some gaps that why you need to close them is not necessary. It could be your investors are saying we need this, or it could be you have a CEO that's progressive and wants to do it. But offsets allow us to put the investment exactly where it's most needed, allowing the funder to actually get the benefit of it and close those gaps that we know we're needing. And those are that's sort of the big picture summation of what we're trying to do all in one. And again, we're to your point's early days. So the Hue Valuation Summit is there to actually test, challenge, and
Yeah.
identify.
Let's talk about that summit coming up. When is it, and why do people need to pay attention?
It's June 10 through 12 at the World Food Prize Hall of Laureates in Des Moines, Iowa. And we're bringing in 12 projects, entities, startups, all again separated in three different tracks. We have E companies, S companies, G companies. And we put two analysts per project who come up with a Hue value. And that Hue value is able to say, we believe the good work this company has done is worth X. And the room debates it. We figure out, okay, well, you made this assumption or that assumption. Is that right? The Hue is very simple on its surface and says, hey, a Hue is the size of your problem, the size of your impact relative to the size of the problem in the community you reach. In the entrepreneurial side of the world, it's equivalent to a SAM. So when you think about startups, you have the TAM, total accessible market, the SAM, the service addressable market, then you have the SOM, the service operable market. And the Hue is basically saying, take your impact off of your dashboards, and for each variable, for each item you're tracking, find the denominator that's relevant to it. So if you're saying we're going to actually solve for hunger, well, okay, you're solving for hunger in pounds recovered? Sweet. How big is the problem in pounds needed? Okay. Then
Mm-hmm.
your amount of work done relative to that size in the community you serve, that is your Hue. Well,
Gotcha.
there's a lot of complexity in that denominator. The same way in a carbon model, you know, what we're mimicking with the Hue is Energy Star. I would argue the greatest sustainability metric in the history of the world. And anyone who says otherwise, I will buy you a lifetime supply of whiskey, because there is no better sustainability metric than Energy Star. Energy Star for the built environment is so simple in visual and interpretation by those using it that it has been massively adopted to great effect. You have real estate brokers making changes in value per square foot as a function of Energy Star. And
Yes,
I'm
that's
not
true.
and I'm not saying they've all dropped out of high school, but I can promise you, you don't want most of them doing particle physics. And the fact is, if you have a model as complex as GHG equivalency that is now driving whether or not you're got a 50 cent to $3 per square foot shift in value driven by someone who really doesn't even understand what carbon sequestration or carbon emissions is. But you have a tool that's given them the power to make real financial bottom line changes. The CFO is signing off on sustainability impacts through Energy Star. That is gorgeous. It's gorgeous in its simplicity. We are attempting to do the exact same thing, but for water and hunger and all kinds of everything from governance, data governance right now. How the models that you choose within your organization for rolling out AI is a massive G within ESG.
Yeah, that's true.
But right now,
That's
how do we
yeah,
price those choices?
that's amazing. It is very cool, Chris. This is an incredible, incredible topic. I would argue that maybe we need to set up a Q&A sometime and do this again. And I'll tell you what we do need to do, absolutely, is after your summit, let's talk about how successful it was and went down at that summit. That would be tremendous, brother.
Well,
But in the
Michael,
meantime, where
I
do
could
people
probably.
go to get involved, or can they get involved with this thing, and where do they get involved? Where
Yep.
do they go?
Yeah, so the best way to get involved with the summit, and by the way, if you want to come and do the podcast from there, we're going to get some clean audio. If you want to come up and visit, again, it's June 10 through 12. It's in one of the most gorgeous buildings I think you'll ever attend a conference in. The World Food Prize has done an amazing. Yeah, if you haven't looked up the things that the World Food Prize have done, this is namesake of Norman Borlaug, who completely rewrote agriculture, really, at the direction of Wallace, who was also an Iowa native.
Oh,
my
cool.
my last house across the way was next to the Wallace Foundation. I mean, the level of impact you have on bringing agriculture to the world is really embodied in this Hall of Laureates building. But to check it out, the website for the is Hugh 2024 DSM, which is HU 2024 DSM.com. On there, you can see the 12 projects, companies, startups that are coming to be looked at. The diversity of them is really, really impressive. We have everything from biochar now will be there. Myland, which is an algae-based soil amendment tool, is there, all the way up to Tumbleweed, which is a death tech. Basically, it makes sure that people understand where all the data either is or can be found for individuals as they approach end of life or actually have a life-ending event, to make sure that you don't lose the wealth that's there. Again, a great governance play. Rooted, which is looking at infant and maternal mortality issues in childbirth in Black and brown communities versus other. I mean, when you're looking at the S, we're looking at proper S's and pricing proper S activities. When you're looking at G, we're looking at everything from enterprise neurosystems, which is building a model of all natural data sources with AI to get better predictive models of our environment. So the breadth of what we're doing is intentionally broad to prove the ability for the Hue to be used as an incredibly diverse pricing mechanism for these social, environmental, and governance goods that are occurring.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like you almost need startups or people to come in and say, "All right, I dare you to make a hue out of this."
that's what we've done.
Right?
I mean, that is
Yeah.
that is that is exactly. So take a look. As I say, we've got 12 great companies right now. Information on them is there. Our analysts, they keep there's a section on the Hue analysis where the drafts. So we require the analysts to actually write their analysis before the conference, and they bring it to debate. So the goal is it would be just like just like a valuation quarterly report by the CEO, right? So the project comes up, says this is what we do. You got two analysts that say, hey, we think it's worth this. This is what we think it's worth. And then the room sits in a working session, says that assumption seems far fetched. I mean, we have one. It's Tech for Rights, which is a political activism tool, right? there's a metric in there on engagement versus action, right? So hopefully the room says, is that multiplier right? And you debate whether or not it is, and if it's the right multiplier, sweet, then the numbers work. If it's not, we got to figure out what's the logic of it, right? When you're looking at my land addresses soil health issues in irrigated farmland, right? Which is 58 million acres of our country that services 51 million individuals who depend on it for their food, right? And right now, over a third of that is in moderately or severely distressed soil, right? They solve that problem. But then, how broadly do they interact in the other parts of just moderately distressed soil? Those are the challenges that are involved in the Hue analysis. And the goal is 3 days of working sessions with 2 companies back to back in each session, 2 sessions a day, where we sit there and say, all right, well, we're saying it's worth this. What do you think? And the goal is to put it all on the table, let the community own the decisions in hopefully standardizing where we can, or more importantly, with everything in ESG, helping us identify and define the certain level of uncertainty that we must accept in everything that is an organic and living community. Because there is no answer as much as there are answerable questions. And that is the purpose of the conference. And we hope everyone will participate. We're going to be making a series of really sort of podcasts out of the end material. All of the analyses are going into an anthology that you'll be able to buy afterwards. But having the right people in the room, and right is anyone who wants to think about this and throw out items. Like, people are staying silent in the room. No. Hop in, have an opinion, have an argument, come and actually say, hey, I just don't know if this fits this, or hey, what if we thought about this way? We need more people helping us in this space to define answerable questions, because we have not done enough of that in this area. And until we start doing that with a framework, like in our argument is the human impact unit focuses on what's that true human issue versus carbon. So,
yeah, no, I love it. I love it. So, we'll advertise the heck out of this. It is the Hue 2024 DSM.com, HU2024 DSM.com, to go there and learn about this stuff and get involved. So, I sign up, I come out there, and I get to have an opinion. In fact, you're going to require me to have an opinion, right? Or you're going to try and coax one out of me, right?
We're going to be gentle, but I can promise you, we've got some good facilitators. If you're able to actually get past Nikki Gillibrand without having an opinion, I think you have achieved a level of prescience that none and few have. So she's able to demand opinions in no time. So
awesome,
which makes her great. So
awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. This has been awesome, and we'll follow up. And maybe I'll take you up. I'll be at the HU 2024 DSM in June. That'd be tremendous.
We are be more than happy to have you. So serious on that on all fronts. So
fantastic, great. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been the Sustainiacs, and we'll catch you next time. Peace and love, everyone.